The following is a legal advertisement from Gwendolyn J. Stirk and the Family Law Group. This does not constitute legal advice and should not be construed as such. This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only.
Hello, my name is Rosa Gelman, and I'm a Special Projects Coordinator at Gwendolyn Stirk and the Family Law Group.
And I'm Gwendolyn Stirk, and today we're going to talk about the concept of help. Should I go or stay when domestic violence is present? So that's a loaded question, don't you think?
It is.
Tell us a little bit about your background as to why you're the appropriate person to be giving this information.
I just finished my master's from Aurora University in social work, and I worked for a year as my internship was as a counselor for domestic violence victims at Guardian Angel Community Services in Joliet, and then I worked for a year as a legal advocate at the Will County Courthouse. Can we stop?
Yeah, it's bad.
I kept messing up. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
3, 2, 1.
Hello, my name is Rosa Gelman, and I'm a Special Projects Coordinator at Gwendolyn Stirk and the Family Law Group.
And I'm Gwendolyn Stirk, and today we're going to talk about help. Should I stay or go when domestic violence is present? Boy, that's a loaded question, don't you think?
Very much so.
And why is it that you're the appropriate person to bring in with regard to this topic?
I've actually spent a number of years working with domestic violence victims. As my internship, my first year internship for my social work master's, I worked at Guardian Angel Community Services as a counselor for domestic violence victims. And then the following year, I worked as the Will County legal advocate, working with people going through the order of protection process.
Well, the question of should I stay or go is really difficult because we can talk about the context of one remedy for somebody going through domestic violence is an order of protection, but where do you think people really should start?
Well, I think it's really important to remember that the average woman leaves 7 to 8 times before she actually leaves for the last time. So people think that conceptually you should understand that this is a bad situation and you should leave. And most people, they agree with that. But for the women leaving, and even the men leaving, it's a very hard decision to make. Their life is entrenched, their children are in that situation with them, and they're not sure financially if they can support those children, if they can support themselves, and what to do next, because they've been isolated from their support systems, and they just don't know where to turn.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that people feel almost paralyzed by the process, and that paralysis comes over them, and they can't move, they can't do anything, and then something brings them to the courthouse, maybe an incident that occurred at the house, and the police are called to the scene. And as a result of it, you're able to get to a conclusion, to get an order of protection or do something about that at that instant moment. But what is a more global plan or a long-term plan for people to really make that decision, should I stay or go?
So there are lots of resources, actually lots of free resources out there. For example, Guardian Angel offers counseling. You can call their hotline, make an appointment for counseling. They offer counseling for adults. They offer counseling for children. So you can start there. Or even they have women's empowerment groups and children's empowerment groups. So I think it's really important to realize that you're not alone in this. And going through groups such as those offered are like a light bulb going off that say, this isn't just happening to me. This isn't just my life. So many other people are going through this, and I can relate to what they're saying. I thought I was alone, but I'm really not.
And now those services and similar services would be available to men also who have been victims of domestic violence.
So for men, the individual counseling would be available, and for their children, the children's empowerment groups would be available. However, the women's empowerment groups are only for women. Because it's supposed to be a safe environment, and many of the women who have been through domestic violence situations have phobias and fears of men. Actually, most of the time, men are not allowed in those groups.
And that's interesting, but nevertheless, there are services that are available, and it would be gender neutral overall.
Correct.
Now, if they're going for these services and these are available, what else would you recommend that a victim of domestic violence do in making that decision going forward?
I also think it depends on their partner. Like, is that partner willing to seek help? Do they recognize, are they willing to recognize the situation that's happening? And are they willing to seek help? There are programs for abusers, both men and women, that offer typically about 24 to 26 week programs that are targeted at stopping abuse.
Now, is that program for the perpetrators of the abuse different than anger management programs?
They are. Anger management programs are just focused on anger, and they're focused on learning to control that anger, whereas domestic violence is more about anger mixing with control, mixing with the cycle of domestic violence. And a lot of studies have shown that actually domestic violence is learned generation through generation. So I feel like domestic violence, while anger plays a huge role in domestic violence, anger is not really the key. It's more that control, it's more that feeling of power that abusers get, as opposed to they got angry, because anything will set them off to make them angry. As much as a victim tries to make a perfect environment, cook the perfect dinner, have it at the perfect temperature, even if she meets steps 1 through 5, 6 could be wrong.
Right, and so that's where the problem comes in. And I think it's important for the person who's really the victim and trying to break that cycle. If you're going to get help and you're going to make that decision, should I stay or should I go? If your spouse or the person you're living with is not willing to get help, meaning the abuser's not willing to engage in a program such as this or to do something that's comparable, you're not going anywhere. Fair? You're to reconcile the relationship, meaning that the domestic violence cycle is going to continue.
It is. And honestly, most counselors, when there's a domestic violence situation, will not offer family counseling. They
Right.
will offer only individual counseling because they don't want to foster that relationship, because there's so many other things that need to be worked on in that type of situation that the relationship kind of is last in line. That abuser needs to work on themselves and work on fixing their broken parts, as opposed to working on how to reconcile the relationship.
And I understand the difference, and I think that's important for us to keep in mind. So the issue is that you're getting help for yourself, maybe through this counseling mechanism, but if you're going to make the decision to even consider staying, then the person you're involved with has to go to individual counseling or some type of program.
They definitely need help. This is not something that people can tackle alone.
Right, it's not like you can put a 3-week Band-Aid on it and it's going to be gone.
Correct.
Because it's like a little snake. It might go around the room and it's going to pop its head up through some other area.
And remember, the cycle can be long. So if there's typically a month between explosions, sometimes if that person has a Band-Aid on the issue, they can go 3 months and you get into a level of comfort and security, and then it happens again, and then it starts all over again.
Right, you complete and you start that cycle again. And so there has to be some recognition on the other part before you make that decision to stay.
And that's actually the hardest part, from what I've heard from PAPE advocates and PAPE facilitators.
And by PAPE, you're talking about the educational program, correct?
For abusers, correct.
Right.
Is the recognition that this is wrong, that this behavior is not acceptable, this isn't how you treat your significant other or spouse, that there needs to be a change, because a lot of times the offenders grew up in that type of environment, so they believe that that's the way it works.
Right. And so moving forward, should I stay, should I go? If they're not making any effort, if the abuser's not making any effort, then you have your answer to your own question. I think that that's sometimes what we forget about. Don't you agree?
I do, but we also need to remember it's still really hard.
It's really hard for the person to walk away. But I will tell you that there is some good news. In Illinois now, we have new maintenance guidelines that depending on the length of the marriage, there can be a percentage of income that can be paid for maintenance, and that's formerly known as alimony, and now we have new child support guidelines. So I think exploring and understanding what is it going to look like. Just because your spouse says, I'm never giving you a penny if you leave me, doesn't mean that that's true, right?
Definitely. And trying to figure out what is out there. And that can be done through contacting an attorney, through contacting these different organizations that can hook you up with other resources. It's so important to look at your options, and even if you feel trapped, to look at what else may be out there to help you get out.
Right, and that's one of the reasons why our firm offers the free consultations, is that we know that there's a cycle of abuse, but at least that knowledge is power for you to consider what might be lying on the other side if you make that decision to go.
And I definitely agree with knowledge is power, because you feel powerless in a domestic violence situation. So giving yourself back some of that power, giving yourself back some of that control, and that you do have a choice.
Well, if you have questions, or you've been the victim, or even if you're the abuser, remember there's help out there, and we can help direct you to that point and to the place where you can get some help. So give our office a call and we'll work with you.
The proceeding was a legal advertisement from Gwendolyn J. Stirk and the Family Law Group.